Welcome back. Well, television shows, the mainstream media, politics, is it all a covert affair aimed at defending America through propaganda to garner support for secret military operations in Afghanistan, for example, or support U.S. allies like Israel? Well, so my next guest argues, Danny Schechter, filmmaker and blogger, who joins me now from New York. Danny, now in your latest piece that I just read, you're arguing that a new spy TV show is actually an effort to persuade the population to accept the kind of secret operations that are driving the war in Afghanistan. And you're also saying this is a continuation of a propaganda exercise that extends beyond that in entertainment. What are you arguing is going on here? Aren't producers just figuring spy shows are entertaining?
Well, in television, there's something called the 3 S's, which is supposed to be, the successful formula for entertainment programming. The 3 S's are sex, spies, and sensationalism. So, television packagers and producers try to integrate these elements in a variety of shows, and we have a bunch of spy shows on the air. The latest one is called Covert Affairs, and it's going on the USA Network, the patriotically named USA Network. And basically it says, a story about how the CIA is pushing the limits to try to defend our freedoms and the like. And it's coming at a time when real-world covert action seems to be the main thrust of our military operations around the world in terms of drone attacks by private companies, outsourced Blackwater-type security companies, and also, of course, covert operations of the kind that General McChrystal has been famous for in Afghanistan. So now this sort of comes home in a much softer way in a TV drama, and where you're supposed to identify with the CIA, they humanize these people, you get engaged in their issues, and the moral questions tend to get lost.
Yeah, but Danny, I mean, with all due respect, spy shows have been around forever. It's a formula, James Bond, that sort of thing. And, you could also argue that the average American isn't necessarily following the drone program that's alleged the U.S. conducts in Pakistan and that sort of thing. And it wouldn't really matter if this kind of show made them more, supportive of covert efforts in Afghanistan.
What I see it as is not so much this show or any one show, but as a sort of a metaphor for a kind of manipulation that's increasingly taking place in our news, where, for example, whoever controls the narrative or shapes the narrative often defines what the story is. Example, we just had an election here. For weeks up to the election, all the networks were talking about how incumbents were toast. Incumbents were going to be losing their jobs. This is what the Tea Party was saying, that the innies were going to be outies, okay? What happened in the election? Most of the incumbents were reelected. The facts did not change on the ground, but the narrative remained. And
well, not necessarily. A Tea Party candidate won a primary in Nevada. That was a pretty big deal. And in addition, the incumbents that did won by the slimmest margin in their history, which says something.
No, it's true, but, what I'm talking about is narrative. Most people don't think about it. Narrative is a dramatic tool that's used in drama programs. So, for example, if the Israelis are able to intercept those ships on the way to Gaza, seize every other journalist's films, cameras, equipment, now some other images are coming out, but a little bit late. They're able to define the story for most people. And most viewers don't realize that they themselves are being targeted by kind of covert action. In this case, a manipulation of information to advance certain message points and a certain way of understanding the world. That's what worries me. Because when we used to have a situation where we would have multiple sources and stories, today it's who has the hottest video. If you have a hot video, that dominates the story, and that's what the Israelis understood, and so they created one. And now people are questioning whether or not it was actually a manipulation of the facts, that, not credible and all the rest of it, but a little late. 49% of the American people say they supported Israel in this effort.
But couldn't you argue that there's a lot more players in the games? Everyone's not just turning to the networks to find out what happened. Citizen journalism is among us. I mean, everybody turns to YouTube frequently, and everybody can post their video there. In this era, there's such a greater abundance of information and sources.
There is more information if you're looking for it, if you're willing to look for it, if you are willing to chase more diverse sources, you'll find them. And I encourage people to do that. But most people are still kind of couch potatoes. You know, we still have a large number of people getting their news from cable, getting their news from networks, far more than getting their news from YouTube at this particular point. And also, when you have a million videos to choose from, it's hard, you know, to know what is right, what isn't. The facts are often, you know, unclear. The narrative is so confusing that many people don't know what the facts are. So somebody who tells them this is what happens, that tends to prevail. And that's what's unfortunate. And it is done covertly because most people don't know the footage that comes into a newsroom. In other words, somebody is selecting what people are going to see, and they select often the same images. Jon Stewart on The Daily Show showed how this Israeli video, for example, was all over every media outlet, from Telemundo to Fox News to ABC to MSNBC to CNN, etc., and so forth. And that other voices on this particular story were not really very visible, even though, yes, you could find them if you look for them.
Okay, I want to talk to you about, you point this out in terms of the economy as well. You say pro-business propaganda has convinced Congress that deficit reductions must come before job creations. How do you figure?
Well, you know, we're in a situation now where the Congress just left for a 4-day weekend, okay, while benefits for 300,000 plus workers run out. They didn't act on those benefits.
Okay, but to be...
In part...
But this isn't the first time that this has happened.
Yeah.
This has happened routinely. I've reported on it, and they do routinely extend them most of the time. Have for many, many months.
It's true. Yeah, it's true, but of course people are being hurt in the process. The point is that Pete Peterson, who's a billionaire, you know, has basically spent a tremendous amount of money to convince Americans that the deficit is their biggest threat to their futures.
But how can you argue that it isn't? $13 trillion, and it's expected to surpass GDP in 2012. How can you argue that isn't a concern?
It depends if you look at the deficit as a number or as a process. What we've had a lot of times is deficit spending that's created jobs. When you create jobs, you create consumer demand. When you create consumer demand, the economy rebounds. And guess what? The deficit goes down. That's what's happened historically. It depends on whether or not you want to alarm people or whether or not you want to explain things to people. And the problem is the alarmists, you know, who like the hot button issues and the scaremongering, you know, of various news outlets convinces people about things, but they don't have the full context or the full story.
Like who? Who are you talking about here?
Well, I'm talking about the people who are just focusing on, you know, on the deficit. Economist James Galbraith.
I mean, how many people really focus? How much of the mainstream America really looked at that?
Brought the deficit down.
How many Americans really look at that?
Well, here's the point.
Well, I'm sorry. We got to wrap this up.
Because nobody.
Go ahead, finish that.
Nobody explains it. Why don't we cut the military budget if you want to cut the deficit?
All right, we got it. We got to end it there. We want to thank you for your comments.